if there's one thing we've ever learned in Russian history, it's that Russia doesn't stop when they feel like they've eaten enough of their territory on their periphery. They keep marching until they, in Lenin's words, they march, and if they hit steel, they'll turn around. If they hit kasha, which is mush, then they advance.
Well, good morning. Awesome to see everyone on a snowy morning, but it's warm wherever you are inside. So that's why it's good we've got Zoom. We don't have to get out in this. We can still gather and share some great stories. And I'm excited, been excited for over a year, knowing Matt Dimmick was going to return to Kansas City. And he's had a fascinating journey. Long military career, time in the White House, time overseas, and a unique perspective to a lot of current events that are really timely and I think of interest to all of us. But let's go way back, Matt. Talk about where you grew up and what inspired you to West Point. And everybody that goes to West Point has some lessons of resilience and grit and perseverance they took away from that experience. Tell us a little bit about early Matt journey.
Thanks, Randy. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. I've dialed in a number of times. I've always been impressed with the conversation. Always walk away with something interesting. So hopefully I can help continue the streak. To answer your question, Randy, I was not originally from this area. We had a homecoming of sorts coming back here to the Kansas City area. But I grew up in a Northeast Ohio town, a little farming town in the middle of nowhere. But my parents resettled, moved for job reasons, and when I was a teenager, ended up here in Overland Park. So I went to and graduated from Shawnee Mission South, and had the privilege of being accepted to the U.S. Military Academy. I had really no idea what I was getting myself into or what I was signing up for. I had a fairly superficial knowledge of what it was all about. I guarantee once I got there, I was quickly educated about what I had stepped into. So the first year after I'd kind of gotten over the shock of what it all meant, and what it all entailed, and really just came to love everything about the Army, its history, its the traditions, the sense of purpose, just everything about the teamwork, the sacrifice, the camaraderie, and just being around everybody else who had decided to sign up and wear the uniform with the U.S. Army strip over the tag. So I was committed. I was a true believer from the beginning, and just absorbed everything that West Point had to offer. Just kind of soaked it in, asked for seconds, and on the far side of that, they turned me loose as an infantry officer, and went to all the infantry schools. Got trained up in my profession, learned all those things, and after graduating from Ranger School, headed off to the military for a series of jobs as lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne Division, and then captain in the 1st Armored Division. Those were extremely formative years in my leadership journey. So everything I think I learned or practiced, learned during those 8 to 9 years when I was with troops in infantry battalions all over the U.S. and overseas.
So that's interesting. So you didn't go to West Point with the intention of a lifetime career in the military. Your dream sounds like it changed along the way. I
was a 17-year-old kid who really had no idea what I wanted to do. The military sounded interesting. Truth be told, I had applied to every service academy, and I even applied to half a dozen other colleges. Back in the 80s, we didn't have there was no internet or whatever. So you went to the college fair, you picked up a few magazines, and then applied to colleges. Didn't really have a very intentional plan. So I applied to a whole bunch of places. I got rejected by every single college, even all the service academies, the Naval Academy, Air Force Academy. They wanted nothing to do with me. And I think, to be honest, I don't think West Point had me on their first string. So I got my acceptance way late in the game. I didn't even know where I was going to go to school. So I was just happy to get accepted by any place. So I took my one acceptance letter and ran with it, and then never really looked back.
Are there particular individuals or experiences that you think really influenced you in that early West Point, early leadership journey, coming out of West Point, going into Ranger School, folks that just stood out as really shaping your future?
When you're at West Point, you're just surrounded by, you're just, based in a whole bunch of people. You've got tactical officers, you've got non-commissioned officers, you've got fellow cadets, all of whom are fantastic people. So you learn from the best, and you're around the best. I was particularly influenced by just a number of individuals that I encountered when I was out in my summer training, out working with folks in the Army, and you really got the sense of what the profession was all about.
So talk us through how this turned into deployments to Germany, and then ultimately a lot of time in Russia and learning about Russia and the Russia region. Yeah, how did all that come about?
So in the Army, we have this program mid-career, when you're at the end of your captain time, so to speak, after you've successfully commanded a company, and you're at that 8 to 9 year mark. The Army gives you a few options. You can continue on whatever branch you're in and continue stepping stones of progressive assignments that work their way up the chain of increasing responsibility. They also offer some other exotic options. One of them was a program in the Army. We call it the Foreign Area Officer Program, or FAO program for short. And this is a small cadre of officers who are steeped in the particular region, every region across the world, but individual officers have a particular region that they focus in. And those officers are basically we call ourselves the strategic scouts for the Army, for the military, because we're given the responsibility of being political military experts on a particular region, regional expertise, understanding the ins and outs of those particular countries and all the forces that go into making those countries particular geopolitical forces of their own, and all the geopolitical interchanges that happen. That they expect FAOs to be somewhat expert in all of those relationships, so that they can be employed in a variety of jobs throughout the Army and across the world, that help us gain a better perspective on our adversaries and better perspective on how to strengthen our alliances and our partnerships. So I jumped with both feet into that program. The Army, in its infinite wisdom, gave me my third choice. I'd selected 2 other regions, but they gave me Eurasia instead. So I trucked off to a training program, which in the Army, it's a very lengthy training program. They invest a lot of time in FAOs and making sure that we've got the appropriate background in order to do the jobs that are expected of us. So I launched into a year of language school at Monterey at our Defense Language Institute, where we had old Soviet dissidents pound verbs and conjugations into our heads every day for a year, from morning till night, until we were fluent enough to be released into the wild. And then spent about a year and a half doing some in-country training, where the Army expects you to travel to all the countries in your region so that you're comfortable operating in all those places, and you learn on the ground exactly who these people are, what they're doing, get down below the book learning level to really understand the geography, the people, the societies. And after a year and a half of traveling around the Baltics and the Caucasus, and Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Central Asia, and a few places through Russia, had the good fortune of coming back here to Kansas City for a year and a half of a graduate program for Russian Eastern European Studies over at the University of Kansas. And once that period of training was over, then the Army put me to work on my first FAO assignment. And I drew the Heart of Darkness card, and they sent me right to Moscow to be an Army attaché. So at that point, my wife and I and our 3 young daughters at the time packed off, moved to Russia, and I spent good 2 years there doing the the standard cat and mouse game that we do with our Russian counterparts over there. Where we have our missions, they have their missions, and then and we see who wins. So at that point in time, there were not as many diplomatic travel restrictions on attaches or diplomats writ large. So we took full advantage of that. I had carte blanche to travel across the country, doing missions basically from St. Petersburg to Volgograd, all the way to the Pacific Rim on Russia's east coast, and then of course every decaying Siberian city in between. So I had a incredible experience, one that our current diplomats are currently not getting the opportunity to get. But I've really got a chance to see Russia behind the scenes, Russia from outside the garden ring of Moscow, and find out a whole lot more about what that country is really made of. It was very eye-opening. And after Moscow, I did a variety of sort of nondescript jobs. These are sort of FAO building block jobs. I served in the U.S. Army Europe headquarters as a security cooperation director, and then deployed to Iraq for a year as provincial police advisor of all things, where I led a team of police advisors who were helping a police chief increase their capacity for one of the regions down in southwest Iraq. And then landed in the Pentagon for a year on chief of staff of the Army's staff, where I was his deputy foreign policy advisor. After that, I had a stint at a senior service college, and then I drew an extremely lucky card, being assigned as the senior defense official and defense attaché in the country of Georgia. So again, our family, our daughters were older at this time. One of them was off to college, but we packed up, moved to Tbilisi, to the Caucasus, and I spent 3 years there, responsible for overseeing all of the defense operations and missions and personnel that were floating in and around Georgia, or had intersections with the Georgian military, and had a marvelous time conspiring with the Georgian military to help build their capacity and make them a much more indigestible target for their aggressive neighbors to the north. After that, it was payback time for that assignment. So it was a Pentagon tour back in DC, and I was assigned to Secretary Mattis's staff as his Russia director, and spent another 3 years there, sort of drawing up our plans and policies for how to compete with Russia, identifying their vulnerabilities and figuring out what policies make more sense when it comes to directing our Department of Defense assets against this great power competitor that we had. And at that point, I was hitting the 27-year mark at the end of my tour at the Pentagon, so already contemplating some retirement plans and figuring out what the next step would be. And I had Dr. Fiona Hill, who was the president's advisor for Europe and Russia, reached out to me asking if I would be interested in coming to the National Security Council staff as the Russia director. And of course, when something like that happens, when somebody from the White House asks you to come and do a hard job, there's really only one answer. So I signed up for it, pulled my retirement plans off the shelf, and jumped into the White House gig. Arrived there in September of 2019, which, if you'll recall, September of 2019 was a period about 2 months after a fateful conversation that our previous president had with the president of Ukraine that launched an impeachment investigation, but about a month prior to the actual congressional hearings. So I stepped into an office. This was the Office of Europe and Russia, which the National Security Council is not that big, in perspective, it's maybe 100 directors. So you were divided up into regions and functional areas. The Office of Europe and Russia was about 8 directors, and we all had Europe carved up into our various portfolios. So this wasn't a small office, but when I walked in, it wasn't a very big office, a very small insular team. But when I walked in, this was September, and the rumblings of whistleblower complaints and improprieties and impeachable offenses were just getting off the ground. So I came into an office that was just about in the initial weeks where I was there. Well, our national security advisor resigned the first week I was there. Ambassador Bolton was replaced by a new national security advisor who was job one was to slash the National Security Council staff and reduce personnel by a third. And then in the first few weeks, our office became the epicenter for a whole host of really dark things. That our office was being really torn apart by leaks from within the administration. We had accusations about who was doing what, counter accusations. There were congressional subpoenas that were flying in through the window every single day that were wrapping up members of our office. And then we just had a good old fashioned political purge that took away a good third of the office. I had a colleague of mine named Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman, who sat next to me, who was working the Ukraine account, was sort of at the epicenter of a lot of this congressional impeachment. He was a target for presidential wrath, directly targeted at him. Our senior director and him and a couple others from the office all asked to come, or I guess they were required to come and submit their testimony in front of Congress. So the Klieg lights of attention were cast very brightly on our office, and it was an interesting time to try to get all the work done that we were supposed to get done while dealing with all this this environment of sort of chaos and lack of trust and kind of a breakdown in the chain of command. So very interesting times. Managed to survive my 20-month tour there. I bridged the two administrations. I had 17 months of that was with the Trump administration all the way to the bitter end, and then we helped welcome in the Biden administration and get the new administration's Russia policies formulated. I had a series of very, very interesting things. It's a crisis a day at the White House, as you can imagine. There's no small measure of issues that come across the desk that are blazing hot and on fire. And I liken it to sort of a blindfolded tightrope walk without a net in a hailstorm. That was every day in my White House experience. So it was in many cases fascinating, a lot of times terrifying. The other folks in the office, the ones who were left, who were working all the peaceful Western Europe issues, they were always laughing at my account because at one time I had the Russia account, and then when Vindman got the boot, I adopted all of his countries. So I had Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, and the three Caucasus countries. And at one point in time, every single one of my countries was either occupied by Russia, at war with Russia, exchanging artillery fire, or they were dealing with a political insurrection in the case of Belarus, or they were at war with each other. I had a period of time where Azerbaijan and Armenia a conflict sparked up, and they fought for 45 days. Our team was trying to get to grips with what to do and how to do it, where our national interests lay. So I'm happy to discuss any and all of that, and I look forward to everybody's questions.
I want to start there and work back because we got to that part faster than I expected, but it's fascinating. One, I think we view the White House as a residence, but there's this whole business that's taking place in there. Talk a little bit about just what the pace of that's like. I guess it's an around the clock operation that you've got going on because world events don't stop. And then two, what did you learn from what sounds like a really difficult environment to create teamwork and trust in what you stepped into, and what do you take away from that from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, you hit on it, Randy. It's if you were ever in doubt about whether the key ingredient to teamwork and leadership is trust, then you just look at some of the White House experiences I had, and you will quickly realize that trust is the essential glue that keeps everything running. When it comes to the White House, yeah, you see the office of the president is fairly large. He's got a large apparatus to help deal with the business of the day and run the executive branch. So the president has a fairly wide-ranging staff. There's a domestic staff. There's the national security staff. There's an administrative staff that keeps the whole operation running. And then you also have an entire White House military office, which runs all of the Air Force One fleet and keeps all the military apparatus running that supports the president's operations. So it's a very big organization. The slice that I had most experience with, of course, was over on the National Security Council staff. And National Security Council, it expands and it contracts depending on the whims of the president and that president's personal style. With President Trump, his instinct was sort of a dislike of the so-called deep state, or dislike of being managed when it came to having regular order and discipline when it comes to policy making. So there was a much different approach in the Trump administration when it came to how national security policy was formulated. For the most part, the president had other interests. So the vast majority of the National Security Council work, the 90% that doesn't make the headlines, sort of continue on without too much trouble. But when it comes to organization, I'll tell you the National Security Council staff, like I said, relatively small. It's about 200 people total. 100 of those are directors who are working on a very specific portfolio of a range of countries, or maybe a particular functional area like cybersecurity or counterterrorism. There's a very thin band. It's not a very hierarchical organization. It's very flat. There's the National Security Advisor, a handful of about 24 senior directors who have oversight over large portions of the portfolio. And then below those senior directors, you've got probably, like I said, about 100 of us directors who are grinding away on various issues. So that's it. And what that supports is the ability for decision making and policies to move very fast from the president's desk all the way down to the person who's grinding it out with the interagency, and then right back up again. So there would be many times when it came to pace of operations where something would spring up overnight, midday, and we would get the policy apparatus into gear, convene as much of the interagency as we could to try to come up with some decisions and policy recommendations and courses of action. And this all could take place within a few hours, and it would be through our senior director's approval up to the National Security Advisor, who would walk it into the Oval Office and either tell the president what was happening, what options were available, or ask for decisions. This could all happen in a very quick span of time because the National Security Council staff's organization ability to maneuver quickly. And of course, there were also issues that took months of grinding policy work, and they didn't yield results overnight. But that was kind of the environment. You could come in with issues that were absolutely burning, with a wick connected to a stick of dynamite that was about to go in a matter of hours, or you would be dealing with policies that had far-ranging effects that affected how our nation was going to be postured years or a decade from now. So that's that's kind of the environment we're in. Now, most of the directors and senior directors come from a variety of sources. I was detailed from the Department of Defense. Other directors come from the Department of State, and then a good number of directors come from our intelligence agencies, from the CIA, from Director of National Intelligence, from Defense Intelligence Agency. So you've got a lot of very senior folks working the policies, who know the issues and who are very familiar with all the interagency counterparts that are needed to provide the right input. That's the kind of organization and teamwork that we have in place. Now, when it comes to actually getting the work done, the relationships and the trust are absolute step one. Like I said, when I got there, our department became sort of the pariah, and there were not a lot of people who were interested in working with or dealing with our office at the time, because it was, I wouldn't say radioactive, but people were very concerned about discussions with our office and where they would go and how those things would end up, or whether it was going to be splashed across the front page of the Washington Post. So in that environment, it was very, very dicey for several months when it came to trying to pull information from departments and get agencies to work together on particular issues. I had to rely on the relationships that I had built with my defense counterparts, my state counterparts, my intelligence counterparts, all of whom who knew me and could trust that the information that they were giving me would be treated correctly, that their departments and agencies would be dealt with fairly in a fair hearing, and wouldn't be negative ramifications for it. Without that trust, then agencies shut down and the policy process starts to freeze. So I quickly found out that as we say in the military, you can't surge trust, and that was never more true than when I showed up in my new position there at the White House. If I hadn't had those previous relationships with a whole bunch of senior folks in the departments that I had to work with, then I would have been combat ineffective from day one. So that trust is easy. It's hard to build. It takes time. It's very easy to destroy, as I saw firsthand with several other directors in my office who went the other way.
Let's jump back a bit, and then we'll go to some questions. I think folks on this call that have traveled the world understand that being out there among the people is usually different than the perspectives we have from the news. You spend a lot of time in regions that are very much in the news today. What did you learn about the people, the way of life, Russia, Ukraine, the Baltic states, Georgia? What was unique about them that maybe we wouldn't know from the perspectives we get from the news?
That's it's a very big umbrella. In a lot of ways, every people, every region are completely different. They come from a completely different background and history, and it's important to understand where those people come from and the type of history that they learn and the stories that those cultures have taught them about who they are and what they believe in. So in many ways, it's every different set of people is a microcosm of their history and their interactions and their relatives and their experiences. So that's important. On a broader scale, I found no matter where I traveled, everybody had very much the same characteristics across the board. They, for the most part, everywhere you go, you will find good people who are trying to do good things, who are working to protect their families and build their communities, and who want the best for their families and want their kids to be free and happy and prosperous. That's universal. Everywhere I went, there was absolutely no change to that. What was interesting though is you do have a variety of different cultures wherever you go, and that will color how those people behave and how they collectively. In Russia, everybody you meet is salt of the earth. I mean, you would recognize them as fellow Midwesterners if you got to know them. They invite you in. If you're trusted, you're part of the family, and there's really no difference there. Now you put several of them together, and it can be a disaster, on a political front, because they make decisions that are that you sometimes scratch your head. But when I was in Russia, I learned very quickly and very deeply that the Russian people themselves are incredibly proud of their history. They are an incredibly resilient, tough people. These are people who, when they crack open their history books, they are looking at 1,000 years of surviving invasions and dealing with threats on every one of their frontiers, and having the guts and the ability to withstand some of the most severe weather conditions on the face of the planet. And these people have lived through it. Their relatives have lived through it. Their ancestors have lived through it. And that is just imbued in the way that they look at their society. So you take a Russian and you ask them about what their circumstances are and where they're headed. They are tough to defeat. They are one of probably the most resilient nations on the face of the earth. They've seen it before. They've seen invasions. They've seen and experienced the loss of 30 million people at a whack when it comes to the World War II losses. They've experienced famine and depressions and so forth. So they have this cultural DNA that allows them to think that no matter what comes their way, they will not only survive it, but they will emerge on the other side tougher than when they started. That makes, when it comes to our strategic planning, that affects a lot of our decisions, because you just can't outsuffer the Russians. There's no amount of pain that you're going to inflict on the Russians or the Russian people or their elected or autocratic leadership that's going to change their minds if their minds are set on a particular objective. All you can do is protect yourself against whatever it is that they have in mind, and try to influence their decision making when it comes to costs and benefits. So that was the key thing I learned from the Russians that I always take away, because there are certain strains of folks in our government who think that just give it time and the Russians and the Russians as a power will just fade away. Well, that's not true. It's not backed up by the facts, and it's not backed up by anyone who's ever dealt with them or worked with them. At other places, like when I worked with the Georgians, you realize geography and culture have an equally firm impact on people like that. Georgians are predominantly a mountain people, and there's broad generalizations. Mountain people and valley people have very different cultures, and mountain people are tough. They're proud. They will fight to the bitter end, and they have a history of independence, and they just don't want to be bossed around by anybody else. And Georgians fit that to a T. They live in a tough environment where they've probably been invaded, and I think Tbilisi to some extent has been burned down 30 times in the course of their history. So they're used to living in a violent environment, but they have preserved that spark of independence and their sort of spirit of maintaining their own culture throughout a history of other people trying to tell them what to do or subsume them into their own culture. So those are some basic things I learned while I was out and about, is that all people generally the same. They all have the same interests. They all have the same designs about their family and self-preservation and wanting the best for their own people. But there are factors from their history, from their geography, and from their society, and the fables that they tell themselves about their origins that impact how they think, how they act, and how they organize.
Awesome. Let's go take some questions. Let's go to Jeff.
Matt, good seeing you again. Having worked for what I like to say every T-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to over 1 million, I find your National Security Council experience and kind of talking through that, where at a company, obviously you're trying to do great things, and depending on the level of trust with leadership and your colleagues. But I mean, you're dealing with obviously global national security, life and death, and just it's amazing really when you look at it from that perspective, versus trying to launch a product or marketing campaign. So it's a little different, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the biggest misconception the U.S. People have about Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, and that region, in your opinion.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Lots of misconceptions about that particular region. The one is that what happens in Ukraine, it has no bearing on our own national security interests, which I completely disagree with, and I think the facts support it. There's a certain strain of people who think that, well, things that happen all the way over in Central Europe should have really, no bearing on the U.S. and we shouldn't be wasting our time or resources or considering getting into a tussle with another major power over something as insignificant as a corrupt country in the middle of Europe. These are serious misconceptions about European security that are kind of, for various reasons, take on a life of their own. But when you look at the region of Central Europe, these are the bloodlands. These are the places where war and European insecurity are born. And when there's trouble in the bloodlands, when there is trouble in that stretch of the world, it doesn't stay contained to that part of the world. It has a tendency to draw in other major powers, and it erodes everybody's security across that region. So that's one huge misconception, is that we should just let Russia have its way with all of the countries on its periphery. And that if we do that, then Russia will be mollified and maybe we can come to some type of agreement. That's a complete misreading of the facts. If there's one thing we've ever learned in Russian history, it's that Russia doesn't stop when they feel like they've eaten enough of their territory on their periphery. They keep marching until they, in Lenin's words, they march, and if they hit steel, they'll turn around. If they hit kasha, which is mush, then they advance. So having a policy of taking Central European security seriously is incredibly important for our own national security interests, and to keep the Russians from thinking that they will get to tear up the rules that we've established over the last 7 decades when it comes to the security apparatus that keeps countries in Europe from tearing each other's throats out. So that's a big misconception. Another big misconception about Russia is and I saw it at the Pentagon, we had 2 widely different assessments, and there very rarely seem to be people who would seek the middle ground. In one case, we would have the Chicken Littles, who saw Russia as 12 foot tall in every aspect, and were so capable and so strong that we really should be paying an inordinate amount of attention to what they were doing and where they were doing it, and that we should exert influence everywhere across the globe to try to keep back this global behemoth from affecting all of our interests. That 12 foot tall Russian misnomer is completely misplaced, because Russia has, even though they have sharpened a number of capabilities and have quite a bit of reach across the globe to stir trouble and make life difficult, they also come with a raft of vulnerabilities and weaknesses. So the 12 foot tall Russian idea is one misnomer that we battle against constantly. The other misnomer is the weak man of Europe idea that Russian demographics are declining, Russian economy is weak, the Russian people are having a brain drain, the Putinist system of government is fragile, and is the autocratic system is one that is just ripe for failure and will collapse at any time. So give Russia 10 to 15 years and it will disappear from the world stage as a fading power that won't cause us any trouble. So let's pay attention to some other things. Leave Russia to its own devices to dissolve in its own weakness and contradictions. That, of course, is an equally wrong misnomer, because Russia comes with incredible strengths. It's a nation that spans 12 time zones. It's got a seat at the National Security Council. It has enough nuclear weapons to eradicate our nation as a functioning entity and destroy the world. And it brings enormous amount of capability when it comes to ground forces and the ability to threaten neighbors and regions all across the world. So that hasn't changed and won't change. They're they have immense national resources. They have enough natural gas and oil to pump for probably another 100 years if they wanted to. And they come with some immense strengths that can't be discounted. So those are the two big misnomers on the Russia side.
I want to jump over Drew and go to Elizabeth because I think she's got the reverse of this question, and then we'll come back to Drew in just a second.
Yeah, so thank you so much for being here and sharing these amazing stories with us. I was piggybacking off of Jeff's great question to flip it and say, what are some of the misconceptions, misnomers that you found on the other side that you were having to dispel or address, and it can come at from a different angle, perhaps, about what they think about us and our own motivations. And so just love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, because we rarely think about what the other side actually thinks about us, because of course, being Americans and being the beacons of democracy and human rights and so forth, anything the United States does or pursues, of course, is pure as the driven snow. So how could any potential competitor or non-ally of ours possibly think that we were doing things that were not good or were not productive? These are these of course are things that Russia thinks every day. And when you put yourself in the mindset of the Russians, and especially the Russians who occupy the Kremlin, when they look at their national security, they see nothing but vulnerabilities, and they see blinking red lights of threats all across the board. To us, that makes very little sense, because we, of course, don't have any intentions of invading Russia, threatening Russia, launching missiles at Russia. This makes no sense to us from a cognitive side. From the Russian side, they may believe that at a cognitive level, but in their hearts, they know that capabilities and mass and firepower that are mounted on their periphery is always a threat and will never stop being a threat. And the only way to make those types of threats less or minimize them is to seek control over the ground on Russia's periphery and expand that as far as it will possibly go, and reduce and minimize those threats before they manifest themselves into what's always happened in Russian history, and that is when there are forces on Russia's borders that are strong and have interests in the rich lands that Russia possesses, they always seek to take a bite out of it. So they learned this from the Mongols. They never forgot it. The Napoleonic armies marched on Russia. The armies of the Kaiser marched on Russia, and then of course Hitler tried to put the ultimate stake into Russia, and they survived all of those through Herculean efforts. But the lessons that Russia takes away is that you never allow a large unified force on your periphery to become organized and build up its power without taking action. So when Russia looks west, what they see is a unified NATO alliance with a constellation of allies and partners that completely encircle it. Now, like I said, this doesn't make a lot of sense to us, because we know exactly what those forces are for and what they're designed for and what their authentic purpose is. But the Russians are never going to believe that, and they will always take that into account. So when the Russians look at us, you have to consider the fact that they see threats where we don't see threats, and they will always see those that way and interpret them that way. Over time, we've come up with ways of mitigating this type of strategic tension with arms control treaties, with transparency, with ideas about trying to understand each other and what the motivations and purpose and intentions of the forces and the exercises that we're doing. those are those are the types of things you have to do to try to mitigate those types of misinterpretations. But that interpretation will always be out there for the Russians, and it always has to be accounted for. We shouldn't discount their how they think and how they feel, because it's important. That doesn't mean we're going to change what we do, but we have to interpret it from their perspective. And they will see tanks and missiles and anti-ballistic missile defenses as just an increasing threat to a threshold of which, once we get there, then it will become irresistible for us to finally take Russia off the table and knock them out for good. And that's how the Russians think, and that's how they interpret all of our actions. And they see this encirclement. They call it an encirclement, from the Arctic all the way through our NATO alliance down into the Middle East. We had bases in Central Asia at one point that they interpreted as further encirclement. And then, of course, we have a ring of bases on the Pacific Ocean, which contain their access to the Pacific, and which they also interpret as just another ring of allied pressure to keep the Russians in place. So, long answer to a very good question. But when you're looking at it from the Russians' perspective, they are fearful of what we bring to the table, and they're always going to be looking for ways to make that go away.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about how they view all of that. Let's go over to Drew.
Matt, I absolutely love hearing your stories and perspective. I can only imagine some of the different things that you and I could talk about, since I was one of the guys who helped build the bases in the former Yugoslavia. There's a lot to that. And I say it that way because let's go back to the very beginning. And I'm curious as to your thoughts on where we are at when it comes to the teachings of the military academy when we were young kids, talking about professionalism and our responsibility to our government being apolitical, and all the things that we learned as a young cadet. How is our military doing in that perspective of the academy setting that kind of standard? I'm curious as to what your perceptions are about our military staying apolitical and keeping this trust with our government, our elected government officials who really control us. How are we doing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I somewhat removed in the last decade or so from our junior officers. So I wish I could say with certainty or with authority exactly what kind of product we're getting out of our service academies and our junior officers. I want to believe that the same principles that you and I learned, and the types of leadership lessons that were infused from the beginning are immutable and are still being imprinted onto into the character of all of those fresh lieutenants and junior officers. I have to believe that. I think the performance of our military shows that. I haven't seen any anything to the contrary. You see story after story about our junior officers doing amazing things all over the world. And getting results in very adverse environments, in complex environments. And when we were lieutenants and captains, the tactical world was a lot simpler, and it was never easy. But we didn't have as many of these variables as our new crop of junior officers have. Dealing with contested electromagnetic spectrum, and dealing with all the confusion that comes when your signals are cut, and when you have a variety of things that you have to juggle. So my assessment is I think they're doing okay. I can't say with as much certainty that our senior officers and our general officers are living up to the same standard that we've expected of our general officers in the past. And I say this with not to diminish the professionalism of our senior general officers, but there has been, unfortunately, a layer of corruption in the civil military divide, and it's become worse over the last 5 years, 10 years. It makes me a little sick to my stomach when I see these long lists of general officers who are signing up for petitions or sending off their political opinions and for one party or the other. And of course, everybody's got the freedom to say whatever they want. That's uncontested. But our general officers have a special responsibility. When the American people see them in civilian clothes after retirement, they're not seeing an independent person who's has an opinion that they want to voice. They're seeing a U.S. military officer expressing an opinion, and there's no separation of that. So I think the American public has become maybe a little bit confused about where the line is drawn, and for good reason, because it's getting blurred. And they wonder, are these general officers becoming so politically minded the second that they take the uniform off, or were they that way when they were in uniform and basing decisions on their own political persuasion or the direction of a particular political party or a singular president? And that's confusing and it's dangerous, and I hate to see it, and I hope we get the ship turned around sooner rather than later. Otherwise, all of the great work that was done over the last several decades of building the confidence and trust of the U.S. military is going to be corroded by people's ideas about where the military stands and maybe which political party they belong to or where their loyalties lie. And that confusion is unnecessary, and that will lead to some very dramatic downstream effects where people may not be interested in sending their sons and daughters to a military that is run by some very politically minded folks in uniform.
I know that's a hard question to answer, and again, I think it's a sentiment though that I think we're sort of grappling with. I noticed Dave's nonverbal concerns as well, and Mike's. But I appreciate your answer. That's sort of the sentiment that I continue to struggle with because of what we learned and what our senior leaders are exemplifying to our junior officers is just not good. So thank you so much for that, Matt. I appreciate it.
Let's go to Libby.
Hi, so forgive the banality of my question because I, unlike many people, do not have military background other than my parents were in the reserves. So kind of tagging on to the end of the conversation with Drew, I am curious about if you think about in the consumer world, who's buying your product, who's using it, what the mission is of the organization per se. With what you were doing, so incredibly complex, with all these facets, the politics, the world peace, how did you keep you and your team focused on this is our product, this is our mission, and just remind them, especially given what you just talked about, just remind them on a regular basis what we're doing, why we're doing it, not so much the how, but the why and the what?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of the complicated things when it comes to the policymaking world or the national security policy world or even strategy development. Is it's not a quantitative science. There's no number that you can assign to the work that you're doing. You can measure inputs, but it's very difficult to measure the outputs. How do you measure the fact that we didn't go to war with Russia this year, or how do you measure the alliance cohesion in a way that is more than just anecdotal or just based on observations? It's very difficult, and it's the tension that comes with those types of that type of work. And we dealt with this at the Pentagon over and over again, where the senior leaders, they want something, they want a scorecard, they want a stoplight chart, they want red, yellow, green. How are we doing? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Well, some things you can't really assign. We just don't know. We hope that our exercises or the size of Atlantic Resolve has a deterrent effect on Russia and its decision-making process, but you just don't know. So when it comes to trying to keep a team focused on what's important and what exactly we're doing, and identifying the most important pieces of the operation and being laser focused on those. It really just comes down to being very clear about what those are, and then constantly communicating those. When we had the dust up between Azerbaijan and Armenia in the fall of 2020, I was responsible for bringing the interagency together from the White House level to discuss exactly what we were doing and what was going on. And as you can imagine, there were lots of attack angles to this problem about who was involved, what the players were. I mean, it involved Russia backing Armenia, Turkey backing Azerbaijan, Israel supplying weapons to the Azerbaijanis, Turks providing UAVs that ended up swaying the day when it came to winning good chunks of Nagorno-Karabakh back. And you had this swirl of sort of geopolitical factors, and it could have been very easy to get lost in the detail and in the daily the daily information that was just piling in as we were trying to sort out where our national interests lie, what the certain players were doing, where things were going to be going today, tomorrow, a week, a month from now, and trying to zip all those together into one piece. But we always started with, where do U.S. national interests lie? And we always use that as the North Star, because in many cases, our core U.S. national interests really cut the wheat from the chaff and dictated what we were concerned about and what we weren't concerned about, what we were willing to put effort towards and what we were willing to back off from. So in circumstances where it's fluid, it's volatile and uncertain, ambiguous, you've got to find that North Star somewhere. For us, it was, where does the U.S. national interest lie? We found those. There were a half dozen that were absolutely critical and important. And then when it came to determining what we were going to do, if it advanced those national interests, then we pursued it. If not, we discarded it, and we just left it for others to work on, or left it to develop. And I think that's what you have to do in those types of circumstances, is find the core pieces of the mission and the task. And when there's too much information and not enough time, you've got to focus on what's most important and pursue those relentlessly, and get after the highest priority items.
Thank you. That's incredible. Really appreciate it.
Let's go to Steve.
Randy, thanks again for another great lessons in leadership. These have all been tremendous. Matt, the various points of contact between superpowers, you've touched on politics, nuclear power, military power, obviously land, control of the land is very important. Newest entrant into all of that is our artificial intelligence and space technology. If you would, what level of importance do those have today, and what do you project them to have as an importance going forward?
We looked very carefully at artificial intelligence and space. When it comes to the Russia problem set, they're dabbling in artificial intelligence, just like every major country is. There's certainly very thorough spacefaring nation, so they've got lots of activities in space. These are critical capabilities that the Russians bring, that they're sharpening, that they're experimenting with, and that they're figuring out what to do with. In space, we're very concerned about the Russians and their ability to take out major parts of our satellite network. And we just saw last year the Russians tested an anti-satellite test. Much to our objections, when I was still at the White House, we were working closely with the Russian National Security Council staff, warning them not to do this type of activity with debris-producing anti-satellite tests in orbit. But they did it anyway, of course, because they have to demonstrate that they can do it. So we're very concerned about what the Russian intentions are with space. Our entire military apparatus, when it comes to deploying force and using precision fires and coordinating a global operation is very reliant upon our satellites and our communications and our precision global positioning system. So those are hard to defend, and the Russians are looking for ways to potentially blind us in that area in the event of some form of future conflict. So that is becoming a huge area of defense and offense, and trying to figure out where the Russians are headed. On the artificial intelligence side, again, this has some dire consequences if the Russians are able to perfect it, or potentially work with their Chinese counterparts, who are also becoming very adept at artificial intelligence. And we're just concerned that when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence, the Russians won't have the same ethical, moral, or practical considerations when they're building these types of systems, because the artificial intelligence side is going to involve building systems where the shooter, the sensor, and the decision maker that decision time is going to get compressed down to a very short span of time. And we're worried that the Russians, in their pursuit of making this system more capable, will take people out of the system and create artificial intelligence systems that will release weapons or launch attacks or loose missiles because a machine dictated that had to be done. So that is very concerning. The Russians had there's some concerns. They've already developed a system like this, sort of a doomsday system, where without hearing from their central command in Moscow or any of their military commanders, if this system detects a nuclear detonation on the Russian homeland, that system itself, an artificial intelligence system, might preemptively launch Russian missiles at the U.S. homeland. That's very concerning. We don't know if that's the case. There's rumors about it in the open press, but that's the type of thing that we're concerned about the Russians doing, is creating systems that are potentially reliant on machines, where the Russians don't understand the capabilities, or don't understand the ways in which a system like that could go wrong, and that it could unleash a weapon system against the United States that sparks a series of unfortunate events that leads to a broader conflict. So I think we're watching that closely, and we're hoping that we can come up with some rules or some definitions or some rules of the road that we can get the Russians to abide by.
If I can add to that, the latest developments, at least the awareness of biotechnology, gene editing, this whole thing with the COVID. What are your thoughts about those things as a point of conflict between nations?
Hopefully, on the bio-war side, I think the Russians are mostly in agreement with us that those are bad things to get involved in, and we're somewhat hopeful that they have the control measures to keep any of the dabbling that they're doing in those areas to minimize the risk. But Russians they don't tend to abide by the treaties that they've signed. So when they look at weapons, they're not going to take into account whatever restrictions they put on themselves. So we're not ruling out the fact that Russians are continuing to experiment with or use those types of terrifying weapons. We think they have the common sense enough to limit the types of things that they would dabble in, but that can never be ruled out. There's some other nasty things going on in Russia too, where they've had islands where they dumped anthrax, up in the Arctic region for disposal. Some of those areas are thawing out. Some of the water barriers that used to be in place are draining. And there's animals tracking back and forth to some of these places and pulling the ghosts of previous experiments, out of their hiding places. So there's no manner of horrors that can emerge from Russia. The bio and chemical weapon side is just another item on that list.
I think you gave us some perspectives on Kurt's question already, just about the circle, but let's go build on Kurt's question just a bit. You there, Kurt?
Yeah, I am, and thanks, Matt. But yeah, I love your description of toughness and grit and who the Russians are. My question is, again, I'm a little bit warped. I tried to do some business with Russia and it was corrupt and it couldn't happen. And then on the flip side, I've had Russians come, immigrants, and worked with them, and they love the great American dream, right? I come here, the capitalist concept, and you see some of the things with, the Ukraine and that circle that you mentioned. My question is, what's the hope? What's the culture? The everyday Russian person culture, the core ground level. What's the culture like? What's the hope? There is no. What is the rush? We know what the great American dream is, right? And we have immigrants from throughout the world who want to come here because of that. What's the great hope or Russian dream? Well, and again, there's thousands of years of service to country and the greatest country on earth, right? That's right here in our backyard. That's Russia. It's who we are. We play hockey, right? What is that culture and who are they? And I don't understand how that socialism resonates with people and how they accept it. I don't, but they must. I don't get it. Can you explain some of that?
Yeah, I mean, briefly, you kind of hit on it. There are two different perspectives. We grew up in the United States, the shining city on the hill. Tomorrow is going to be brighter than today. Our descendants will be more prosperous than we are. Life will get better, and history is one long arrow towards improvement and betterment. And that's the life. That's the life we've lived. That's our country's path. Brighter days are ahead. Russians don't share that perspective. Russians have a very uniquely pessimistic viewpoint on the future. They don't see brighter days ahead. They hope for brighter days ahead. They got a famous saying, hope for the best, expect the usual. They would like to see brighter days. They are firmly convinced that that's not Russia's destiny. And I've got a book on my shelf here, the Agony of the Russian Soul, which is an insight into trying to package exactly what the Russian soul is. And in one major respect, you could classify the Russian soul, so to speak, as the Russians believe they're the one nation on the planet that is designed to suffer for the sins of our broad civilization and bring the world on to another side. It's embedded in sort of the Orthodox religion, where you suffering and doing your time here on earth in suffering will produce results for humanity. That's a very Orthodox Russian Orthodox religious perspective, and it comes from their deep and ancient pieces of their culture. So they don't see, like I said, they don't see things getting better. They are there to trudge through life, make the best of what they have, do what they can for their families, try to live this life as best they can. But they know obstacles are against them: the weather, their governments, their autocrats, the forces that be in Moscow, all of the invasions, the famines, the poverty. That's just Russia's lot, in their opinion. They would like to reverse that, but they're not expecting that's going to happen. It's a very different way of living. When you have that perspective, you approach your life, you approach your life decisions. You expect certain things out of your government that are completely different than what we expect, and that's why they sort of produce and replicate the types of governments that they have and the way that they're organized. Russia's a very communal type of society. You saw these in small villages throughout their history. It was, the communists fed on that and built upon the way the Russians have lived their lives for centuries. So they're very, very trusting of themselves, and their core family. They're very distrustful of everybody outside their immediate group, and that applies at a national level as well. So I don't know if that answers the question. I mean, it's dangerous territory making broad generalizations about an entire culture. But if I had to distill what the Russians are and how they differ from us, they're not expecting sunnier days ahead. They're ready to weather the storm, and they feel like that's their duty. They absorbed the Mongol invasion so that Western Europe could thrive. They absorbed Napoleonic invasion so that the rest of the world could be at peace. They defeated Hitler and suffered massively so that that evil could be taken from the scene. That's how they see themselves. But they're definitely ready and willing. I wouldn't say willing, but they know their destiny is to suffer on behalf of the rest of the world.
No, that's really helpful. I like you it resonated when you said at the very end, within the villages, they will trust their family, but outside their core family unit, they're very distrustful. And so that I can see how that can be at the core and go towards that broader understanding or belief of, I can't even trust my government, right? Thanks. No, that's helpful. Thank you, Matt.
It's a fascinating perspective, Matt. I'm glad you shared that. Let's go back to some leadership experiences and go to Joel.
Matt, thanks for doing this. I was just curious. You talked a lot about so much of the noise that someone in your position has to deal with. And the best I could do is compare it at such a lower level to working in baseball, where I generally tend to know more than almost anyone that is watching, and that's where all the noise is coming from. So you learn to tune it out. In your case, this is more life and death. You're seeing, I assume, potentially friends that are suddenly talking heads that are experts on one side or another. And you're hearing from friends, civilians that think they know everything based on the source that they're watching it from. I was taught fairly early on that the results of a baseball game won't affect what I do. So if everyone is ready to jump off of a bridge because the team lost, I'm just going to go and do it again tomorrow, and it doesn't bother me. But you can get sucked in. So how have you been able to, especially right now with as volatile as everything is, and I think maybe going through some things we've never seen before, we haven't, and maybe you have, maybe you haven't. How do you tune it all out? How were you able to tune it all out when you see a Vinman sitting next to you who may be getting death threats and on and on and on? How do you make it not personal?
Yeah, it's hard because it's very surreal, especially about October of 2020, when trying to keep my head down, working on a variety of tasks that needed to be done that were very high priority. But we have all the TVs going in the office, and every one colleagues of mine, from the Deputy Assistant Secretary Cooper to George Kent from the State Department to Fiona Hill to Alex himself and Tim Morrison, who was our senior director. All these people are up there on TV in front of the cameras giving testimony about issues that we had dealt with directly, and it was incredibly strange to be in the middle of that and to see colleagues of mine who were subjected to the bright lights of a news cycle that is really very unforgiving. It's when it comes to coverage of these types of events, every media outlet takes their own set of facts, recombines, and assembles them to make a distinct narrative. Many of those facts, if not all the facts, are probably true, but when you arrange them in a certain sequence, they tell one completely different story from another side that paints in a completely different picture. So, I tried to stay, as mentally as distance from it as possible. I was lucky I survived. I didn't get any of these congressional subpoenas or have to deal with it. So I was one of the crew who was able to kind of pick up one of the oars and keep rowing while other folks were taking incoming rounds. It comes down to prioritizing and figuring out what you can do and what's within your control and what's not within your control. That's how I had to approach every single day. And there was no other way around it. It's not, we didn't have the option to quit. You can't say, well, this is too hard. This is, too much attention and too much heat, and I would rather be doing something else right now. That wasn't an option. So that was taken off the table. But yeah, keeping the focus on what's important, knowing that, this too shall pass. These types of things are rainstorms and thunderclouds that come, do a lot of damage and then move on. But we still had a job to do, and we continue to focus on what exactly we were expected, and did our best under the circumstances to keep the wheels moving and keep the trains of our national security policy portfolios in action. Recognizing that there are a whole bunch of other things that were tearing away at the team and tearing away at our ability to get things done.
Well, I have learned a ton today, Matt. Your perspectives from having lived among the people over there really were enlightening, and it's not something we normally get from the news. But one of the things you said earlier, people everywhere are the same. And so folks here in Lewisburg are getting up and going to work and getting their kids to their ball games and getting kids to their band concerts, and the same in OP and the same in Kansas City. And so with all of this in the news about Ukraine, Russia, why does it matter?
To the average American, probably doesn't matter one bit. They can probably watch a few minutes of the news and be interested that stuff's going on. In the grand scheme of things, could matter a lot. If we get our policy with Russia wrong, or we make missteps, or we do things through action or inaction that erode our relationships with key European allies, then things are going to get very difficult. The average person is going to see it when they go and fill up a tank of gas. If we get things wrong with Russia, and the energy supplies are a casualty of our missteps or our geopolitical mistakes, then you can just go ahead and watch the price of gas skyrocket to $120 a barrel or more. That's a direct impact. Not that the average American could do much about it, but that's how it's going to be manifested on a daily basis. Other things too is if we get this wrong with Russia, and we send the wrong signals about our determination to maintain security in a key part of the world and to support our allies and partners, there's another major power out there who will take some lessons learned from that, and that's China. And China may make some decisions based on how we approach Russia and how we approach this crisis in Ukraine, and draw some conclusions about our commitment and our ability to wield our power on the world stage. And that will have drastic ramifications if the Chinese take the wrong assumptions or make the wrong conclusions about what we're doing in Ukraine and apply that to their aggression towards Taiwan. And if and when that happens, then the impacts to our society, to our economy, and to potential conflict will be dramatic.
So it's pretty fair to say that for the long term, these are critical issues, even out here in Lewisburg, and we need to stay in touch with our elected officials and stay on top of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. As much as we would like the world to not reach out and touch us, we don't really have that luxury. So we have to constantly be engaged with the outside world, and hope that our elected leaders and our policymakers are in tune with the right decisions and making those decisions with the best information and best intentions.
Well, a lot of great comments on here. I think folks were really inspired by your words and your lessons. You've had a really unique perspective to a part of the world that most of us don't experience, and appreciate you coming here and sharing those insights and just help us understand a little bit about why these events that seem so far away really impact our lives here.
Well, thanks, Randy, and thanks for the opportunity to participate. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, great job, Matt. Appreciate it. Good to see everyone. Thanks for the great questions and great insights. Hope all of you have a great weekend.
All right, we'll see you
later,
later,
everyone.